Hey guys, this is Ashtyn Dowdy here. I'm presenting my capstone project for my master's in science education. The topic I've chosen to cover for the webinar here, or professional development, is instructional strategies for high school biology in low income schools. So we'll kind of start out with what are some challenges that teachers and students face in these low income schools as far as science and biology specifically is concerned, what effects do those challenges have on student success rates in science, and then finally, some instructional strategies that we can implement to improve student success for science education. So our first kind of topic here, specifically before we even jump into solutions, we need to address what are the challenges that students and teachers both face in these low income schools, specifically in the science classrooms. So our first study that we are looking at here is taken out of rural Missouri. Several students and teachers were observed in this particular study, and these following issues were found as a result of the study. So these low income schools tend to face things like low fiscal capacity, fewer management support services, greater per pupil costs. So again, costing more per student to provide the same education that elsewhere might be a little less money. Higher number of teachers teaching outside of their specialty area. This is something specifically that I have personally seen a lot. In the science department where I teach, we have people who are originally not science, don't have a background in science, but are currently teaching a science course. Like, for instance, maybe they have a background in social studies, but now they're teaching physical science or something along those lines. So, again, that is a fairly prevalent challenge in these situations. Less competitive salaries and benefits. That's more, again, on the teacher side of things, but there's a high turnover rate at a lot of these schools because the salaries are not competitive. You don't get as great of benefits. Less specialized space and equipment. Less availability of planning support services, fewer evaluation support services. So again, here out of this particular study that I have quoted here, really the big thing that I've noticed even myself in my own classrooms here, again, teachers outside their specialty area, as well as less competitive salaries and benefits. All right, another study here came out of South Africa, which seems like that's a world away. But if you look at a lot of these challenges that this again in this study, pre-service teachers were asked what challenges they face. A lot of these challenges are things that we face here, even in the state of Georgia. So again, poor school management, lack of proper infrastructure. That's a big one. And you think infrastructure, that doesn't necessarily mean the school itself, but maybe where the students are coming from and living, right? There may not be Wi-Fi available. There may not be technology available. Just in the community in general, where they are living, which presents a whole other slew of issues there. Overcrowded classrooms, that's a big one. When you have kids, one teacher and 40 kids, that's a pretty prevalent issue in these low income classrooms. And shortage of materials. That one's pretty self-explanatory, and again, a pretty frequent and prevalent issue there. One last thing, I just wanted to address. These are a couple issues that I myself, this is again not from any studies or anything like that, but just things that I myself have noticed in my classroom that tends to be challenges that we face in these low income situations. One particular challenge is probably the biggest one for me, is parent involvement and communication. So at my school, we have a communication service where you can text and email parents. And every grading period, I send home messages home to, especially all my students that are failing, but any students that, any issues, concerns, anything like that, I send messages home. And the majority of parents do not contact me back, or the number provided or email provided is not in service or available. So again, communication is a big issue there. Another issue here is parent education level. So especially once you get up into some of the upper level science education courses here, and especially in high school and things like that, it gets harder and harder. Again, the content gets harder and harder, right? So oftentimes in these low income areas, You have parents that maybe finished high school but didn't go much further than that. Maybe science wasn't their thing, or you do have some parents that didn't finish high school. So with that being said, there's kind of that challenge there of, even if the parents are there and are present and are willing to provide support, they can't necessarily help their kids with their homework in that necessary in that sense. So now we're going to look at, so we looked at the challenges that students, teachers face. Now let's kind of look at what is the implication of that? What does that actually cause as far as student success is concerned, as far as low income goes? So I'm looking at two specific examples here of local schools in the Athens area. So first off, we're going to look at Madison County High School, and we're going to compare that to North Oconee High School. Again, both of these high schools are right outside of Athens in this area. And I did want to point out, we're going to show low income versus student success rate. And I won't say one necessarily causes the other, but there's definitely a correlation in these numbers. So please keep that in mind as we look at this stuff. So first off, population statistics. This is not school specific. This is just county specific in general. So if you're looking at Oconee County, their overall population is 44,000, almost 45,000. Number of high schools, there's 2 high schools in Oconee County. The median household income, this is where we start comparing data here, is 115,925. And when we say household income, that means everybody at the house, all the adults together combine their annual income there. Their poverty rate is at 6.08%. Then you look at Madison County. Again, this is the county as a whole. A little bit smaller population, nearly at about 30,000 there. There's only 1 high school in Madison County. But here's where it gets really, really different here. Look at your median household income. In Madison County, it is nearly half the median household income of those in Oconee County. And then you look at your poverty rate up at 18.9%. That is over double what it is in Oconee County. So again, some pretty differing numbers there as far as economy and income goes there. Specifically looking at schools here, looking at North Oconee High School, percentage of students with economic disadvantage is only at 10%. And again, this is looking specifically at North Oconee, not Oconee County as a whole. Percentage of students in the free lunch program is 8%. Percentage of students in the reduced price lunch program is at 2%. And minority enrollment is 24.2%. Now we look at Madison County, quite significant increase in your economic disadvantage here. You're at 49%. That's nearly 5 times that of North Oconee there. Percentage of students in the free lunch program is 39%. Percentage of students in the reduced price lunch program is at 9%. And your minority enrollment is at 34.3%. So really what we want to focus on here is just the big difference in as far as what percentage of students are at an economic disadvantage. Again, you go from 10% at North Oconee High School, and then you nearly increase that by 5 times at 49% when you go to Madison County High School. So again, this is the challenges and things like that. These are the numbers, but what does that actually cause? What does that mean in terms of student success rates? So we got a couple numbers we can look at here. Again, keeping in mind North Oconee has a much lower rate of low-income families. You look at just at the top here, comparing how many students took AP exams. North Oconee, you're looking at 53%. Then it goes on to 31% at Madison County High School. What we really want to focus on down here is the science proficiency. So the science proficiency number is based on the Georgia milestones testing, which for high school is in the subject area of biology. So what this percentage is telling you is how many students scored proficiently on the state mandated test, on the Georgia milestones test. Again, you look at North Oconee, you're at 78% versus Madison County, you're all the way down at 51%. So a pretty significant drop there. And again, I just want to emphasize, I'm not necessarily saying that the income rate is a causation for the success rate, but there's definitely a correlation there. As one goes up, the other tends to go down, right? Again, correlation, not necessarily causation. Looking at that number again here. This shows you the state average, which state average is at 40%. So Madison County is in fact a little higher than that, 51%. But then again, um, the North Oconee numbers there jump all the way up to 78%. All right, so that's the why and the what. So why does it change? How does that cause it to change? Now, how can we, as educators, fix that? And before I jump into a couple of possible implementation strategies myself, I want you guys to kind of brainstorm on your own here what maybe you do in your own classroom settings where you have these low-income students and families in your classroom. So really quick, for about 30 seconds, individually, write down one challenge that you face teaching biology or other science courses, but specifically biology if you've taught that in a low-income school. If you were able to implement, pardon, an instructional strategy that helped with this challenge, take about 1 minute to write that down. If you haven't come up with an idea yet or have not implemented a strategy, maybe just brainstorm that. But again, take 1 minute, either write down the strategy that you have implemented or maybe brainstorm one that you could potentially implement. Now form a group of 3 to 4 people. Each group member should take about 30 to 45 seconds to share both their challenge and their solution. So again, everybody should have written down a challenge as well as solution for that challenge. Now everybody needs to kind of, just as a group, discuss those things, share those ideas, and that kind of thing. All right, let's all come back together here. What is one strategy that you heard today that you may implement in your own classroom? So we'll discuss as a group here a strategy that maybe you hadn't thought of yet, but something you heard today and that you would want to implement as your own or in your own classroom. And also I did want to point out, we can compile a resource list and an ideas list that everybody can share out for those of you that are interested. All right. Now that we've gone through some of your individual strategies, we're going to move into a specific strategy here, which can help specifically in the area of biology. And that strategy is a school garden. So there have been several benefits. And again, this information here that I've collected came from a article released by Michigan State University. School gardens, again, that's just a pretty self-explanatory garden you plant at school. And students help to keep and maintain and take care of. There's a lot of benefits that have been shown with school gardens here, like the increased knowledge and awareness about gardening, agriculture, healthy eating, and seasonality. Positively impact children's attitudes and consumptions of fruit and vegetables. And they provide an opportunity for moderate physical activity and social interaction among peers. So there's a lot, in the social context, there's a lot of benefits here. But as of yet, we haven't talked about science. How we can integrate that with our science curriculum and things like that, which we'll get into here in just a second. Before we do that, just as kind of a general idea, school gardens are much less common in the South and Midwestern regions of the United States. So that's us here down here in Georgia. They're not quite as common. They're much more common at urban elementary schools as compared to schools in small towns. They're less common at smaller schools than at larger schools. And then this one here, so I really want to focus on, they're not very common at schools that serve mainly low income students. So again, students like we have in our own classrooms here. Now we're going to look at a study here that shows actually the benefit of implementing a school garden in a low income setting. And one thing I want to point out, one of the other benefits here, school gardens can be very intricate and very expensive if you want them to be, but the nice thing about it, they do not have to be expensive, and they can be basically very minimal as far as costs and things like that go, especially in a lot of the communities we have around here where we come from, a lot of farming communities and things like that. And you can find places that will help to contribute to that. But again, school gardens do not have to be overly expensive, is kind of the whole point there. So this study, again, looks at low-income students at a school in Portland, Oregon. So this focused on 113 sixth grade students in Portland, Oregon. They were all from a Title or low income middle school, and 82% of the students that participated in the study qualified for free and reduced lunch. So again, fairly low income school here. As far as just kind of statistics and things like that go for this particular study, students were 59% female, 41% male. Students were very ethnically and racially diverse that participated in the study. You had 25% Asian, 2% Black, 26% Latino or Hispanic, 27% white, and 18% multiple ethnicities, 1% other ethnicities. So again, a lot of diversity there, as well as English was not the primary language at home for 51% of the students. So over half the students, their primary language at home was not English. The main languages spoken at home were Spanish, Vietnamese, Russian, and Chinese. So kind of the whole idea here, this school in Portland, Oregon, in association with Portland State University, this study was conducted. But essentially, low income and racially diverse students were taught several science contexts with the use of a school garden. So over here to the right, you see figure 1, which just kind of shows a year-long curriculum map using this garden. So if you look over here in the fall, they focus more on the topic of energy. You move into the winter, you look at cell biology, disease, body works, and you move into the spring, you're looking more at weather and atmosphere. And down here, it kind of goes into the specific standards that each of those covered. The standards referenced here are from the NGSS standards, which are very similar to our standards here in Georgia, the Georgia Standards of Excellence. But again, this is what that was referring to here, and how these teachers and these researchers implemented these things for that purpose. Looking here, this is figure 2 included in the study. So there's several pedagogical supports included in the study. It was culturally relevant, had a lot of hands-on, high-quality activities in there. Is very authentic. Garden motivational experiences. There's a lot of relatedness, competence, autonomy, engagement, all those good things. What were the outcomes of this particular implementation of the school garden? There's a lot more science class engagement, learning increased, and science grades increased. Again, looking here at our figure 2. So through the study, again, this study commenced over a year. Students discovered their connections to the plant-based flora and fauna. So again, students actually got to see native plant life and things like that out in these gardens, and apply that to their learning. They studied science with a special focus on NGSS curriculum for the day. They learned how to compost, they created art, and they shared cultural stories about food and gardening. So again, not only were there some science connections here, but it also ended up being a lot of cultural and social interactions that occurred through this study as well. One other thing, again, team bonding was fostered through these collaborative garden projects. So what are our results here? The results of the study basically indicated that students did have a positive effect on their motivation when the school garden was implemented and used in their science class. Specifically, again, it supported students' engagement and learning. And also, if you look down here, students with more positive motivational processes in the garden, that then contributed to a more positive identity in science, higher levels of engagement, and also students ended up receiving higher grades in science at the end of the year as well. So overall, there was a very positive effect of the implementation of the school garden on not only, again, the social and team bonding skills, but also just science in general and science grades and things along those lines, and motivation to learn science. So again, that was a middle school in Portland, Oregon. How does that apply to us here in Georgia as high school biology teachers? Well, there are plenty of standards here, the Georgia Standards of Excellence, that we can apply to a school garden ourselves. So we're looking at our cell unit here. So SB1A, so our Georgia Standards of Excellence standard here, focuses all on cell organelles and cell structure. So looking here, you can use these plants, grow these plants in your garden, and go take that inside, put them under a microscope, and you can use that garden in that way to implement this standard. So looking here, again, this is a specific lab you could do. You could grow onions in your garden, put those under a cell, and your students can actually see the different structures. Like, for instance, here you can see the nucleus. You can also see the cell law here. And again, that applies to our first unit, which is cell structure and cell organelles and all that good stuff. Depending on the quality of your microscope, you might even be able to see some of those other organelles like mitochondria, chloroplast, things like that. But if nothing else, even with the more basic microscopes that you may or may not have access to, you can see some of those really big organelles like the nucleus and like the cell wall. Another unit you could apply this to is your cell energy unit. So talking about like photosynthesis, cellular respiration, all that good stuff. So again, you can grow the various plants and plant life and vegetables and things like that in your garden, and do a couple different photosynthesis experiments, right? So looking here, inputs for photosynthesis, right? Sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. So you could actually have your student plant and vary the conditions in the garden to kind of see how that affects plant growth, right? Like they vary the amount of sunlight and they maybe put one plant in a more shady area, one plant in a more sunny area. How does that affect how the plant grows? One plant gets more water, one plant gets less water, right? Things like that. Factors that they can control and maybe see how that affects the rate of photosynthesis. There's also more complex labs you can do where you actually measure the rate of oxygen produced from the plants and kind of how that things like sunlight, things like that are effective of that. So again, it kind of shows we can do those labs that show those processes of photosynthesis there. One last standard here that we could apply to our own stuff is down in our ecology unit, which typically we do at the last unit of study. But focusing specifically here, SP5B, looking at this idea of specifically energy webs and energy flow and things of that nature. So again, when you create these gardens, it's going to encourage the creation of new ecosystems and things along those lines. So students can observe those new ecosystems and see the own natural food webs that are created based on those ecosystems from the garden that you have grown. Again, these are just 3 examples of ways we can implement this in our own school setting, but there's a multitude of other ways we can do it as well. That's all I have for you. Thank you.